Hey folks, Bush here. I am a therapist in the New York area, and it dawned on me that I spend a lot of time in my car reflecting on certain things that might have happened in a session or something that may have been talked about in the ICBM workshop. I thought maybe I would just share these things with you as I'm driving, as I'm thinking. You can get something out of this and let me know if you'd like to hear more. So today I want to just touch on something that all of us will probably experience in some way or another if we have family members or friends. And it's real close to me right now because I've really just experienced it in a very challenging way. I'll put it that way. Many of us will experience the loss of a loved one, or through either natural circumstances or an accident, or even in some ways which could have been affected in some way, but it was not, and it was left to play out the way it was going to play out. And so that's kind of the framework that I myself have had to experience in recent months. So there is a portion of time after death when we experience grief, and it's an emotional situation or feeling. It's the emotional response, that's a better word, to what has happened because of our great loss, the loss of someone who we cared about, or someone who we were emotionally connected to. And for me, that ended up being, first, of course, my mother, who passed away last year. And then my brother, who passed away not too long after she did. Just to be clear, grief is a natural, multifaceted response to loss. It's an emotional loss, something that's very close to us. It could also be a physical loss that creates behavioral distress. So it could be the loss of a loved one, or and that loved one could be even not just humans, but pets and things like that. We could also have grief over the loss of a job, or a loss of a relationship. It could be a romantic relationship. It could be a friendship. So these things that make changes in our lives, they can be abrupt, or they can be happening over time, where some people have they're grieving while the incident or the episode is going on. It's ongoing. It could be sometimes it's framed by the 5 stages. First there's denial, and then there's anger, and then bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. It's a unique process that takes its time, and when we have this, when these things are happening, sometimes things are more understandable, more concrete than others, and sometimes you have a complex reaction, response to the loss or the death or the life-changing situation that makes you grieve. My mother was 99 years old. She had lived a very, very full life. She contributed in many ways to my own development and development of my brothers, and to others. She was a community-oriented type of person. Not only my mother, but her siblings. She had 10 siblings, so there was 11 in the family. But I can remember most of my aunts and uncles of my mother's brothers and sisters being very active, and for that group of siblings, even their partners being quite active and involved in community things, definitely around the church, that type of thing. So I grew up seeing very strong men and women within my family, which was, it shaped who I then became eventually, or whoever I'm becoming eventually. If you clock their dates, they were born in the 1920s. So they were right in the middle of Jim Crow. They experienced Jim Crow, whereas both of my grandmothers were probably closer to emancipation and the beginning of Reconstruction, that type of thing. But my mother and father and their siblings definitely grew up during the early and the real early days of Jim Crow, early in the last century. My brother, on the other hand, becomes a different type of grieving. And I think it's complicated in the way where I thought that what he was doing was a way, well, there would have been a way to survive what he was going through. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and black men usually, it's said that we suffer from it at greater frequency than other populations. Other populations get the same prostate cancer, but it seems that we suffer through it in a much different way. I wonder, is really that the case? There are studies that are being done about that, but I'm not quite convinced that we exclusively pass away, die from prostate cancer, which is a very slow-moving cancer. And I myself, if you haven't been, following my podcast, I myself am kind of evidence of this. I was diagnosed in 2022, and I'm still here. I did the standard of care, and this question, I kind of heard it all the time about, black men dying from prostate cancer, whereas I would think that in some cases, not just black men, but black people, we are tending to wait too long to get a diagnosis, number one, and to act upon the diagnosis that we receive, number two. There's no scientific paper about what I just said, but in being in this space from the end of 2022, I've had to deal with it, and that includes with my brother who did not choose to use the standard of care. he chose to use an alternative standard, which is, in my opinion, not a standard. It is, this is a survivable disease, and if you are under standard of care and it's caught early enough, you can survive it. However, if you think that you're going to do some alternative to the standard of care, then you are sadly mistaken. And there is no alternative as far as I can see. And the outcomes are quite different. That my brother has died. He died 78 days after my mother's death at the age of 62, 63. And he had probably a longer period of time to decide, because he was diagnosed before I was, to even if he wanted to do the alternative ways, which would be more like organic food and things like that. He did fasting. He did all these things which were quite natural, but they fall into the bucket of health and wellness. And when you fall, you can be in part of health and wellness, but eventually when someone tells you you have cancer, you are in kind of the disease pathology bucket that health and wellness cannot help you with. You can continue to do the health and wellness, but the sustainability of that is not going to happen. It's not. You have to act in a way that is medical around this particular disease, and the standard of care then becomes what it is you should be looking at. Now, I'm saying that because, I sit here diagnosed. I've been diagnosed, and right now, as far as I know, I am cancer-free, but my brother did not have the same outcome. He is no longer here. He passed away. He died in December of 2025. The interesting thing about that is he was convinced that there was some alternative way, as many black people, and particularly black men, think that they are going to find some alternative, some magic. There is something out here that's natural. Well, cancer is natural. It's your cells, a part of some of your cells doing something quite natural, but it may be contrary to what your other cells are doing. But these things are it's very commonplace now. It should be no wonder that when you get a cancer diagnosis, you act in a fashion that is the standard of care. And that's exactly what my brother did not do. So here's where grief kind of works in with this. I have been between being very mad at him for taking this particular path, and not for nothing, he was extremely diligent at it. So it wasn't something that he faked. He was doing all these different protocols in earnest till the last weeks, maybe months, days of his life. He was convinced that this was going to pass and he would be alive today. What I also find interesting is there were others in his circle who were also upset with him about the path that he took. And there's something to be said when people, not that they have all the answers, but if they are, some in his group, had very good understanding of what the medical implications of his prostate cancer were. And he chose to not listen to them, which I find very, disheartening, because I was also running up against that same wall of surety that what he was doing was the best thing. And yes, we all have choice, we have autonomy, we have agency, we can do that. But there's something about not heeding or listening to others, particularly people who love you, that rings of a little hubris, that you have this surety and without doubt. But then one of his friends conveyed to me that this is not unusual. There are many people who take this course, and at some point they enter the medical domain. They enter the standard of care where everything that they were trying to avoid is thrown at them. So if they were trying to avoid radiation and radiation sickness, that was thrown at them. If they were suggested to have chemo, that was thrown at them. Or any type of intervention that would have been medical, the things that they were trying to avoid and wanted no part of, that then became the thing that might have kept them alive. But in many cases, it was always too late. It was the right care, just too late. There was no time left. No time. And the interesting thing about my brother's situation is that there were a lot of unexpected things that happened to further delay any kind of significant care he was going to achieve that would prolong his life. So I think, my takeaway, what I would like people to take away is this particular grief is very unlike the grief I have around my mother. And I'm sure for others, it has that same ring because, death cannot be avoided. It is, it's unavoidable. But if you have all this technology and all this know-how, and you have, very sound science as you're going to get in this era that we live in. Is it the best? Not always, no. But it's what you have. And, to my mind, prolonging your time here, if you're useful, if you have things that you're doing and you have people who you affect, your primary job is to be here for them, to love and nurture them, to do everything at your disposal to prolong your life so that you can be an influence, an inspiration. And I think at the end, my brother realized what an inspiration he was, what an effect he was having on other people. He just didn't have any more time time is going to work against you. So I've stopped kind of hiding and not talking about my own situation because it doesn't really, it perpetuates this secrecy around men and the thing that we really need to start sharing about our experiences. It was through my own diagnosis that I had to find out that several of my uncles, they had different forms of cancer, but they never said anything to anyone. It was a secret. And I think if we're going to help each other and support each other during this time when the disease is at its weakest, or it hasn't really taken a foothold in our body, we need to be able to talk to each other about it, because time will run out. So you don't have a lot of time from what the diagnosis, but I guess for in that case, first you have to have a diagnosis. You would have had to go to a doctor. You have had to have a PSA test. You would have had to had spoken to some medical professional about your health and wellness, your health and well-being. Without that, you don't have a sense of what's going on with you. Just because you feel okay doesn't mean you're okay. There could be other things, and my brother experienced that. He was, the diet and the regimen he was on made him feel great. The cancer that was coursing through his body did not care. It was still working. It was still doing what cancer cells do. So give yourself a long enough runway that you can get a diagnosis, and then you can do something about the diagnosis that you received. But waiting is not going to be a good thing. Looking for some magic protocol, particularly any of those that come out of the 1930s. There's a specific one that comes out of the 1930s, which has never been even clinically studied. So you can go on with health and wellness, but when you enter the space of pathology and disease, you need to do the standard of care. As I said before, there are many people who surrounded my brother who I found out felt just like me. I thought I was just a voice in the wilderness that he was ignoring. Eventually, we just never talked about it because he made a demonstrative statement about what he was trying to do. However, that demonstrative statement sent him, or bonded him to a path that cost him his life. So for me, grief has been mixed, not with sadness all the time. I am sad about not having my brother to talk to anymore, but I am also mad that this survivable version of cancer was able to take his life because he wanted to do things his way. So I don't know. I don't really know quite what to do with that. My message to you is do the very best you can to preserve your life and to be useful while you're here.